An idea that is popular in our time is that of solipsism, which is the belief that your mind is the only one that exists, or that the self is the only thing which can be posited to exist. Now, of course, most people aren't solipsists, but most people have most likely had the thought or asked the question, am I the only thing that exists? Because I am all that I have access to. In this video, we will seek to accomplish two things, the first of which being understanding the epistemological framework in which this paradigm operates, and secondly, providing an argument against solipsism using a method of presuppositional critique and analysis. All philosophical paradigms operate on a set of presuppositions, assumptions, about the world in order to make sense of the world. Thus, it is reflected in our metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Here, we will focus on only epistemology for the time being, even though all do in fact come in contact. We will touch on this later. With that said, in order to critique solipsism, we must start with a critique of its epistemic presuppositions. As seen in the introduction to this video, the solipsist reasoning goes as follows. I am the only mind which I have access to. I may come into contact with other human beings, but them acting as I do, like a sentient agent, could only be an illusion because there is no way of me entering into their psyche. Even if I could depart from my own subjectivity and quote-unquote enter theirs, it would still be through the lens of a separate subjectivity. Therefore, it would still remain my own and not theirs. Thus, we can conclude that since there is no way for me to have access to their minds, I have no reason to believe other minds exist but my own. Before we critique the argument, we must understand that the conclusion of a more consistent solipsist would be like the one mentioned before, where instead of saying, therefore, no other minds exist at all, it would be more consistent to say, I don't see any good reason to believe in the existence of other minds. This is because the lack of ontological access would not allow you to say, it does not exist. You can only say something does not exist if you have access to the ontological status of that thing directly in this epistemology. We see here that the conclusion of solipsism rests upon an epistemology of naive empiricism, which asserts that we can only know things through the senses which we observe things through. Once again, on this epistemology, it would be consistent to conclude the truth of solipsism because our mind is all that we have direct access to. It is all that we can observe. Before I provide the critique, I must say that the arguments found online are not that good and often fail in arguing against solipsists. This is mainly because these arguments attempt to argue on the epistemic presuppositions of solipsism. In other words, they try to refute a conclusion that comes forth from the axioms of a system in which it operates consistently, so of course it's going to fail. Arguments against it using their presuppositions of naive empiricism will lose. Instead, we must show how their presuppositions are not warranted. I will now provide two arguments, none of which are unique to me. On the other hand, the second one, a more direct critique, comes from a friend who formulated this argument, and to our knowledge, me and him have not seen anyone else formulate this argument. That friend, by the way, is Trey over at Telosbound, and you should go check him out. I'll leave his channel in the description below. The first critique is of the epistemology of naive empiricism and the notion of, quote-unquote, all knowledge comes through sense data. The critique is as follows. 1. All of our knowledge comes through sense data. 2. The first premise is a knowledge claim, as it is making a claim that we know how we know things, or in other words, it is making a claim that we know the source of our knowledge, which in this case is the senses. 3. Since our knowledge comes only through the senses, all we have access to is what we can sense. 4. Humans are not omniscient and our senses are limited. 5. Since this is the case, I cannot make universal claims, as this would presuppose I had access to all of reality. 6. Saying all of our knowledge comes through the senses is a universal claim. 7. Since I cannot make universal claims, since I only use my senses which are limited and do not have access to all of reality, the statement itself that, quote-unquote, all knowledge comes through the senses cannot be made because my senses do not allow me to do so. 8. Thus, since I did not sense that all knowledge comes through sense data, I cannot make the knowledge claim that all knowledge comes through sense data. 9. We can now openly discard this epistemology since on its own basis there is no way to prove it, and using any other means outside it would not work because it would contradict the very notion itself that the means being used to prove the means of knowledge shows that there are alternative modes of knowledge. To water it down, if I try to prove all knowledge comes through the senses by appealing to something outside the senses, I have refuted and negated my own position. Now for the second critique, which is a more direct critique of the solipsist position itself, we will use a form of the reductio ad absurdum. 1. Solipsists only believe in what they can observe through the senses and their own subjectivity. 2. The certainty of experience is limited to the present moment, as the existence of the past and future is just as uncertain as the existence of the external world, since you do not have access to it through the senses. It is outside experience, if we can even say that it is outside experience, because all we know is our experience. 3. The present moment is infinitely divisible. As once you affirm the existence of the present moment, another one is here, and you then need to deny it for the same epistemic reasons. There is a never-ending amount of present moments. 4. Thought and experience occurs through time, and since we do not have access to time, as it is not in the senses, time must be denied, and since time must be denied, so must thought, because thought occurs through time, and that which occurs through time we do not have access to, so we can't observe it. 5. The solipsist has to deny what he sought to affirm. If one believes that experience is the only thing that exists because it is the only thing that they can observe and know and sense, they, for the aforementioned reasons, must deny the very thing which they say is their fundamental ontology. We can thus conclude a few things here, one of which being that the epistemology guiding the solipsist by its own accord cannot account for itself and renders it useless in this regard. We can also conclude that there is no good reason to believe in solipsism for a similar reason, namely that its radical skepticism ultimately leads the position to swallow itself into absurdity.